Welcome in, everybody. This is the Lions Pulse. I am your host, Miko, and I am so happy today to be joined by my guest, Ryan Matthews, senior editor over at Pride of Detroit. Uh, as you guys have probably seen the last couple of streams that I've done, I've been slowly making my rounds, through the Pride of Detroit, writers and beat writers and things of that nature. And so super excited getting a chance to talk to Ryan being one of the main faces of their main podcast. So Ryan, super excited, glad that you were able to find some time to join us today.
Oh yeah, no, not difficult to find time, Miko. Appreciate you having me on. This is awesome. You already dropped a Jim Caldwell reference with things of that nature. I do it all the time. I
I
love it.
I don't
It's
know
one of my
when I
favorite
started
phrases.
doing it. Yeah, I don't know when I started it, but it is like my I think they call it like fillers. It is one of my like go-to fillers when I'm looking for something else to say.
Yeah,
It's things of that nature.
yeah, me too. With me, it's that or for all intents and purposes.
Oh, that's a good one too. Yep.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
I use that one too. My wife like hates it because she's like, you try to sound so smart when you use those types of words. And it's like, I'm literally just grasping at air.
yeah,
And
yeah.
these are the words that are coming out right now.
Just looking for a lifesaver. Yeah.
Exactly. Ryan, so obviously summer is here upon us. How have you been enjoying your summer? I know as a teacher, this is kind of like you are living my dream as far as like not having to do anything over the next couple of months.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, honestly, summers used to be like how you just described it when I was single and didn't have a
Uh-huh.
family, and I could, play 8 hours of Xbox, clock in and clock out. Alex Reno and I used to play Overwatch like in the summer months for like how I literally described it, like an 8 hour shift. Clock
Yeah.
in, clock out, eat dinner, go to sleep, do it all over again. But I love summertime just from the standpoint that it's an opportunity to like rest and
Mhm.
recharge and get ready for not only the next school year but also for Lions football. It's a nice, it syncs up pretty nicely.
Love it, man. And yeah, I definitely get that, that whole thing of again, take some time to just recharge. I'm just now getting back from vacation. Did a stream on Monday, and I even had to like prep my audience, like, hey, I'm fresh off vacation, so this may not go the way you guys are used to. But
Right.
before we jump into like our main conversation today, talking Lions, previewing a little bit of training camp, which kicks off, or at least doesn't kick off, but guys start reporting next week. um First, to the audience here, first of all, appreciate you all taking the time to come hang out with us. If you are new to this channel, I usually stream on Mondays and Wednesdays, usually around this time. If something just so happens where I can't stream, I always make sure to let you guys know via YouTube and Twitter. So again, if you're new here, feel free to hit that subscribe button. You won't regret it. Again, streaming, trying to create some static content as well, so you get a little bit of everything on this channel. And if you have been around this channel but you haven't watched too many streams, please be sure to hit the like button on this one, hit the notification bell so you can be made aware of any other time that I go live. And yeah, real quick, just give a couple shout outs to a couple people in the chat really quick. My guy Grit, always showing love in the chat, so appreciate you, Grit. Ryan, I'm sure you are very familiar with this person, Dan Pask, in the chat saying looking forward to this. Again, Dan and Grit were in here early. Karen Lin Wu saying, hey, Miko and Ryan, appreciate you guys coming through. And yeah, so again, Ryan, super excited to have you here. There's a lot that I sent you over a good amount of questions and a good amount of stuff that we're going to kind of go through as far as talking about
Yeah.
training camp. I'm gonna throw you a curveball early though, because this was not on the list of questions, and it was only because I hadn't had a chance to watch it myself. But just kicking things off here, what was your biggest takeaway from the Brad Holmes interview that kind of dropped? I think it was like late last night, between Brad Holmes and Peter Schrager. What was like your biggest takeaway from that conversation?
Oh man, so many good nuggets of info. I mean, just in the first, 19 minutes of their conversation, I spent my entire morning transcribing like those first 19 minutes
Mm-hmm.
to text. And I'm just writing and writing and writing, and it's like, man, there is so many good little nuggets of info in here about the Lions. And then the big chunk of that podcast is a lot of him talking about, going from being an enterprise rent-a-car salesman to,
Yeah.
working with the Atlanta Hawks as an intern and doing PR stuff and kind of his whole journey and everything. And I would definitely recommend going to check it out. But yeah, those first 19 minutes, I think maybe my biggest takeaway is for a team that was choosing 6 and 18, they
Mhm.
had 14 players that they had identified as blue chip, true
Yeah.
first round players, right?
Yeah,
And
that was a shocker to me. Like, again, we all go through our various mock drafts throughout the year, and, like, I know for myself, I had probably a bigger list of guys that, like, I was at least okay with. Like, you have your top of the list, like, "Oh, I would love to have these guys,"
yeah,
but, I mean, 14 is kind of crazy to think about when you're picking where they were picking at that time.
for sure, especially when you get the context of him talking about how, I think he said, in the 20 years that I've been doing this, like most of the time, like 17, 18 guys,
Mhm.
maybe a handful more, but like, you know, he said that even like late into the process, they had like 9 or 10 guys, and then it jumped
Yeah.
up to 14. So, I found it really refreshing as I don't know if you're like me, Miko, but like as I'm watching the draft, it's Jameer Gibbs at 12 after the trade happens, and then Jack Campbell at 18, and it's like two, and they talk about this in the podcast a little bit, but two positions that have kind of been devalued in the draft, and especially to go running back and linebacker in the first round. I found it to be refreshing to hear Holmes talk about, like, look, we had our guys that we liked, and
Yep.
I love how you pulled out the training day reference and talked about him, kind of just talking to Dan and being like, look, we're gonna get our guys and we're gonna get the hell out of the first round. Like, we're
Yeah.
gonna get the dudes that we've identified as being blue chip, true first round players, and we're gonna get out of there.
I love that. Actually, I do. I love that analogy as well because, like, it definitely felt like they were getting shot up. Like, as after they made those picks from Lions
Yeah.
fans, from media, like everyone was locked and loaded and had a take that they were letting fly loose. So, but to go back to your point, like when that pick was made, so Scotty and I were actually streaming at the time, and I will tell you, I was shocked,
Hmm.
but like I couldn't be mad because Jameer Gibbs and Jack Campbell were 2 players that I was just like, I was high on as well. I just never would have thought in a million years, these would have been the guys that they would be taking in the first round. Um, I know,
Yeah.
well, and I think you guys ran a couple mock drafts as well, where you were like, "Hey, if Jameer Gibbs falls to in the second round, or hey, if you're really desperate for a linebacker in the second round," like
Hmm.
these were names that were coming up, and then the Lions were like, "Yeah, the hell with that. We're gonna take them in the first."
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. I want to ask you actually. So, like, the Lions choose Gibbs at 12. What was your reaction to that? And then how did that reaction change when Campbell gets picked 18th?
So when they picked Gibbs, I was like, "Oh, okay." Like they clearly I was trying to rationalize like did they want a running back period? And did they
Yeah.
just like not want to take Bijan at 6 because they knew the fan base would riot and probably
Yeah.
burn the city down and they just settled on Gibbs. And then I was like, "Okay, that's fine." Like, okay, they're taking like a really good running back. I really like Jameer Gibbs. Um and so it's like, okay, well, they're still gonna go defense though. Like they're gonna get that corner, or they're gonna like I think Jalen Carter had already been picked, but it was like, okay, well, hey, Kalijah
Yeah.
Cansey, Christian Gonzalez is still on the
Hmm.
board. Like
Yeah.
it's one of these, and then it was Jack Campbell, and I was like, oh,
Yeah.
okay, that's fine. Like, and that's like all I could kind of like say at the moment. Because at that point, like up to draft night, I don't know about you, but like I hadn't watched a ton of tape on like either player, but like I was familiar with Jameer Gibbs enough on him where I was like, no, absolutely home run threat. Jack Campbell was not as much research. And so that was one of the first things I did, even on this channel, was like dive into like who are these players and how do they comp. And I'm like head over heels for Jack Campbell at this point.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's another thing that really comes through in the interview that he did with Schrager is like, I liked how he mentioned that his philosophy about defense overlaps a lot and aligns with Aaron Glenn's in
Yeah.
that you have to have guys that do two things. He said you have to have guys who thump and you have to have guys who cover. And it seems like Jack Campbell's one of those. Yeah, he can do both, right? Like he's heavy in the
Hmm.
run game in run defense. He has the athleticism to cover tight ends in this NFL climate. So it's I feel like maybe we had similar feelings. I think I was kind of reeling from the Gibbs pick when it was made, and then the
Yeah.
Campbell pick felt like Holmes was like specifically targeting the fan base to be like,
Yeah, like at this point, like, are we
yeah,
being trolled?
right, yeah. He's like, you think that was crazy? Wait, what I got for you guys for 18? Because like you said, Christian Gonzalez goes the pick before that, right?
Hmm.
Cansey's still on the board too, and Cansey's this
Yeah,
player who got so much attention in the pre-draft process because of the Aaron Donald stuff, whatever. And it was just, again, it was a pick that was seemingly out of nowhere, and it was really refreshing, like I said, to hear uh, Holmes in that interview he did specifically say, we don't draft positions, we draft players. And
yeah.
it's like, oh, okay, yeah, I rock with that, yeah.
And I think that's probably been like my biggest takeaway from that interview because and from the draft as well. Like it was a double whammy for me of realizing, you know what, as a fan, I can do better in evaluating what I think this team is going to do and not to just uh follow the Mel Kipers of the world. Not to say that these guys don't have information, but really like look at my team and not just look at the screen and what are people saying makes sense, right? And so
Yeah.
I know for me personally, like I took it as a like not an attack, but like as a personal like sign of like, yo, as a fan, you can do better. And now as a commentator on the team, like you can do better than just to, regurgitate what other people say.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, great perspective. Yeah.
All right, Ryan. Well, with that said, I do want to jump into training camp because that kicks off next week. And like I said, well, it doesn't necessarily kick off. Guys start reporting. Rookies report on Wednesday, I believe, and then veterans report that Saturday. So one of the biggest things that I feel like the team got, or at least the team and Dan Campbell got a little bit of flack for early on in training camp last year, especially with them being on Hard Knocks, was the physicality that they like started day one with. And, Dan has his passionate speech about like, hey, I know you guys probably think I'm crazy, but he's trying to like let them know like, hey, I'm trying to get you ready for what the season comes.
Mm-hmm.
Seeing how the Lions had their string of injuries and no one can necessarily say if they're directly correlated to that approach. Do you think the Lions are going to continue that approach though, just going into this training camp? Do you think they'll still continue this early physicality on day one?
I think that while, I mean, Brad Holmes is a great example of this too, but like they'll adapt, but
Mm-hmm.
they know what they're doing, right? And with Dan Campbell especially, do I
Yeah.
think that he's going to change up his approach in getting players ready physically for the season by, again, I think in that impassioned speech where in Hard Knocks he's talking to the players and he's like, look, he's like, I know you guys might think like I'm crazy for doing this, but he's like, this is the science.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to trust Dan Campbell that he's done the research and he knows the science because again, he's a guy who went through it, right? He understands
Sure.
what it takes to get ready for an NFL season because he's been through the grind. And I don't see him changing his approach. It's kind of like, the whole, in terms of coaching philosophy, will he decide to be less aggressive on fourth down once his
Right.
team is quote unquote more competitive? No, like I again, Dan Campbell, the word to describe him in my mind has from day one, it's always been authenticity. And that guy is so authentic to who he is and how he thinks. And I think that he's going to stick to this approach. As long as he's a coach, like I don't see that changing. And I think it might be hard, as you said, to kind of parse through whether or not these injuries have anything to do with, the physicality that he, starts in training camp. But it's all well within, the rights and the guidelines of the NFLPA in terms of what you can do in terms of padded practices and things like that. But I gotta trust Dan Campbell at this point. Like, don't you feel like at this point in the rebuild, I can't remember the last time that I felt so optimistic about the direction that the Lions are heading in. That like I trust Brad and I trust Dan. At this point.
No, absolutely. And I think like this is where like you and I are around the same age, I'm sure, but like I still have this old school mentality that like football is played like almost in the way that Aaron Glenn said it, where it's like it's still one man whooping another man, and that doesn't get, you know, you don't get better at that by simply going through walkthroughs and simply always doing two-hand touch.
Yeah.
I think doing it on the first day is probably the best day because it snaps guys out of it, and it's like, hey, we're playing football now. So
Yeah.
you can leave the beach behind. You can leave all the partying and all the stuff that you were doing up until this point. Now it's football time. Now it's business. And so Yeah, I do feel at this point Dan has earned himself a level. Dan and Brad and Sheila as well have earned themselves a level of trust where it's like, you know what? Whatever approach you guys are willing to take, I'm all for it. It's a little jarring at first, especially again, outside sources saying like, "Hey, that's unconventional." But then you see, how this team doesn't necessarily never really hit a wall during the season. Like they kind of obviously they stumbled out the gate, but they were able to just kind of crawl out of that and still kind of progress down the stretch. So yeah, I'm all for it at this point.
Yeah. Yeah. Well said. Yeah.
Um, looking at training camp, so obviously, like again, training camp is the time where pads are going to go on. We're finally going to get like the closest thing to real football. Obviously, they're not keeping score. Obviously, they're not going 100%, but it's the closest thing that we're going to get to real football. And with you guys going out there and covering the practices and things of that nature, is there a position group that you kind of like have circled and that you're like, yo, I need to know everything I possibly can about this position group as camp is going through, and I need to see how they're progressing?
For me, it's got to be the cornerback position, and to get a little bit positionless, I guess it's the defensive backs. If I can just lump them all together, I think that's
Sure.
the group that I'm most intrigued to see what they're doing. Because
Hmm.
when it came to minicamp and when it came to OTAs and things, hearing Jared Goff talk about how the coverage is stickier this year, like they're not making it so easy for me in practice. I want to see it too. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like I'm not seeing that. I'm hearing Jared Goff say it, but I'm not seeing it, and I want to see where guys are lined up, what they're doing.
Hmm.
I want to. I feel like one of the ways that they most benefited in terms of obviously they're talented players. Cam Sutton brings with him all that experience that he got in Pittsburgh and the different roles that he played, and he's playing inside, he's playing outside, he's doing safety stuff. They're talented players. I want to see and I want to hear some of the communication, right? Like I want to
Sure.
hear how well they're communicating, because I think in the past couple of years, right, it's been the Miami Dolphins game, it's been communication breakdowns, it's been
Yeah.
uh again, things of that nature. So I want to see the defensive backs group, and I want to see if they can take that step, because I think that truly is the key to this defense kind of taking a turn,
Yeah.
and really maybe not going from, again, like I think from going from worst to first is a little bit overblown, but like I think if they can click and if they can get together and they can communicate well, you're going to see that level of play improve to the point where you are talking about like a top 16 defense, right? And
Yeah.
maybe that's all you need for this offense, right?
Yeah, no, and I agree. I think the group that I'm looking forward to most is opposite of yours or plays in front of yours, but I do agree with you that I think this secondary is going to be the catalyst and is going to be the unit that kind of pushes this defense forward. So if this defense is going to go from worst to respectable, at least if is kind of what we can say as far as middle
Yeah.
of the pack, we're going to talk about going from worst to respectable. I think it does start in the back end, and I think that's what Aaron Glenn has probably wanted since he's gotten here, and he finally kind of has those players. For me, though, the position group that I'm like most like kind of honed in on, and I just kind of can't wait to see, is the one group that couldn't really do much during OTAs and minicamp, and that's your defensive line. Specifically, if I could,
Yeah.
kind of copy you a little bit to being specific, like the defensive tackle position, because that's the group that I think a lot of us looked at going into the draft, going into free agency. We were like, hey, we like Aleem, we like what Bugs did, but there needs to be like some improvement of some kind in some form or fashion. And the best we got was an unknown third round pick in Broderick Martin, which I do like. I do like the potential of what he could be physically, and the signing of Christian Covington and the sighting of a walking Levi Onwuzurike. Like
Hmm.
that's the group that I kind of just I have to see it and I have to be able to read about it to understand like what are those matchups looking like? And I feel like it's not even so much Aleem because I know at this point Aleem's going to show up. It's the others. What does everyone else kind of look like and how are they handling, going up against this offensive line? And even again, bleeding out to the edges, what does that edge group look like and how are they mixing and matching and how are they going up against this offensive line? Because yes, the secondary is I think is really going to do their job, but their efforts become moot if like the pass rush isn't getting there, if they're not actually like wrecking havoc in the backfield.
Yeah, great points. I think the interior defensive line obviously is where maybe the most question marks lie, just because, and specifically if you want to talk about it, like first and second down, like
Mm-hmm.
what does that rotation look like on first and second down? You assume, Aleem's going to be out there as much as he can be.
Yep.
By the time you get to third down, though, and again, it's years past, so who knows how this figures into how they move forward. But I have to imagine they love playing that NASCAR package, right? And
Oh, absolutely.
you move Aiden Hutchinson inside, you can move Josh Pascal inside. There's a lot of flexibility and versatility on the edges to move guys inside when they're pass rushing downs. My thought process is, I know that Dan Campbell, any football team that he leads, is two things, right? They want to run the football and they want to stop
Mm-hmm.
the run.
Yeah.
How are they going to stop that run? Like, can I trust that there isn't going to be this precipitous drop off if, I mean, heaven forbid anything were to happen in terms of depth and when it comes to injuries, but Aleem McNeil, after that, it's Isaiah Buggs and Broderick Martin. Like, those are the two guys that I'm,
Yeah.
putting all my eggs in that basket. Like, again, I'm interested to see maybe some of the depth that gets cultivated in training camp.
Yeah.
You mentioned Covington. Like, I think that's a name to keep in mind. But it's going to be interesting to see how that shakes out.
Yeah, I was actually, so the stream I did earlier this week, I was actually talking about some of the guys on the edges, because like, again, trying to figure out, like, we know Aiden is locked in at a starting spot, right? As much as they love to talk about competition, Aiden's not competing with anybody other than like, who's going to relieve me when I'm tired. And so, like, for me, I look at Josh Pascal as that guy of like, you know what, that's the guy that I would prefer to have starting opposite Hutch, because he's the guy that I want on the field the most. I don't want him just in on NASCAR packages where you're going to kick him inside. Like, let him play on the edge so he can be develop to be a really good run stuffer, and then kick him inside on NASCAR, because you do have the likes of James Houston, you do have the likes of Romeo and Charles Harris, and maybe Julian makes this roster by some sort of miracle. But like, there's enough guys on the outside where it's like, okay, but some of these guys, you got to pick somebody to start opposite of Aiden. And for me personally, it's Josh Pascal. Do you have someone that you're like, you know what, this is who I would love to see kind of take control of that job going into the season?
Oh man, like, again, we keep on kind of circling these position groups, and they all seem to be on defense so far.
Yeah.
But I guess that's where I don't know, that's where a lot of the question marks are. And I think for me personally, like, two guys that stand out to me are a couple of, at this point, they're veterans, but it's Charles Harris and it's Romeo Okwara, right? Like,
Yeah.
those were two names that were potentially on the chopping block when it came to, hey, what cap casualties can the Lions have this year? And they weren't cap casualties, and they weren't even restructures. They were complete renegotiations.
Yeah.
That sends a message to me that they want to be here.
Mm-hmm.
And it also sends a message to me that the Lions still think that they have something in those guys. And I think we're so far removed from when Romeo and Charles both played really good football, right? Like, relatively speaking, that I really want to see it. And I think if those guys can play, I mean, you're talking about guys that can be 3-down players. Like,
Sure.
there might not be a reason you can keep Charles Harris off the field. There might not be a reason you can rationalize keeping Romeo Okwara off the field if he plays up to, that was the first big contract that Brad Holmes handed out to anybody, was extending Romeo Okwara. So those two guys, again, I think it comes back to Miko. I think it comes back to this offseason. A lot of national writers have said, what did the Lions do to get better along the edge? And it's like, they're trying to figure it out themselves. They didn't need to go out and do anything splashy.
No.
They have a lot of in-house stuff, right?
Well, I was going to say, like, the best thing that they did was get healthy. Like, because you
Yes.
look at the guys that they have, Romeo's had a 9-sack season, or a 10. I think he's had double-digit sacks, right? I think he's had a 10-sack season.
Romeo?
Yeah.
I think so, yeah.
Charles Harris has had, 8-9 sacks in a season. We know what James Houston and Aiden just did in their rookie seasons. And even though Josh Pascal didn't have it like consistently, like, he had a game where he picked up 2 sacks in a game. So it's like, he's got it. They had the guy. John Kaminsky proved to be, like I called him, in my past stream, like he seems to be the chess piece that like just kind of makes everything else work, where they can move him wherever, and that D line still functions at a high level with him in there. So yeah, I agree. I don't think this team ever really needed to add an additional edge rusher. It's a luxury where if I talked about this with Jeremy when he was on, where if you maybe don't have a true number two, if you don't feel like you have a number two and that these are all rotational guys, then yeah, maybe you go out there and you try to get like a for sure starter. But at the same time, I could understand why the Lions would sit back and be like, nah, we're good with the guys we have.
Yeah, because that's the one position I think that you want to have a lot of depth at, right? Like you want guys
Yeah.
rotating in and out and keeping them fresh, and you know, uh, that was the whole conversation about bugs, right? And I think a lot of people, to kind of bring it back to the interior defensive line, just to kind of show why I think the Lions like their depth up front on defense right now, is
Mm-hmm.
that in order to get the most out of Bugs, you wanted another body, right? Just because
Yeah.
you wanted Bugs to not be out there so much so that he can keep himself fresh and in the situations that you want to deploy him in. So, again, the Lions, they're going to run a lot of 5-2-4, right? They're going to have a lot of two linebackers
Yep.
out there. They want to put five guys on the defensive line, and they have the guys to do it. You even brought up Kaminsky, he's the milk carton guy, right? Everybody's
Yeah.
like,
Like who?
John Kaminsky, the best kept secret in Detroit, right? So, yeah, just tons of depth, and it's going to be really interesting to kind of figure out how the equation all gets settled between the interior and the outside guys.
All right, so I'm gonna actually jump ahead really quick and get one more defensive question in here, so then we can actually start talking some offense after this,
Sure, yeah,
because it has been this stream has been pretty defensive focused right now. But
sure.
when looking at this defense, we can talk about the players all we want to, right? Like I think we would agree secondary looks to be improved on paper. We both seem to like the depth and the players that they have at edge. They at least added, I think, a very key piece in Jack Campbell to the linebacker core, and sure, they at least added an additional body to the defensive tackle group. But I think it all kind of still falls for me on the shoulders of Aaron Glenn and him being able to get all of these pieces to work together to actually have an impactful defense. When you look at Aaron Glenn and looking at this defense and looking at the pieces, what is something that you think he can do to like really help them take that jump? We know about the players, but is there anything that the coach himself can do to help elevate this group?
Biko, I'll be honest, I wish I had an answer for you, but sometimes
Mhm.
I wish I had more of like an inside baseball answer for you. But sometimes, and this kind of rings true, and it goes back to a conversation that myself and Jeremy and Brett Whitefield had in a pre-draft podcast, and
Mhm.
we're talking about quarterbacks. Funny enough, we're talking about how sometimes it just takes putting talent around the quarterback in order for the quarterback to be successful.
Yeah.
Like Tua Tagovailoa is a guy who a lot of people are ready to write off, but then you
Mhm.
put Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle around him, and my goodness, like the Dolphins might have something, right?
Right.
I think with Aaron Glenn, it's been talent deficient defense, and when you think back to even the 2021 team, right? The
Yeah.
two top players on that defense were Romeo Okwara and Jeff Okuda. Those were the players that everybody was most excited to see on defense. Okwara tears his Achilles, Okuda tears his Achilles,
Yep.
and then what do you have left? Like that's the year where Charles Harris has his best season, right? Um,
Mhm.
and you have players like Alex Anzalone. You have a lot of guys who are moonlighting. I mean, Amani Oruwariye. Like I'm saying some names that aren't here anymore, right?
Yeah.
And it's because I think the talent has improved.
Mhm.
Again, like you said, it's on paper, but we just talked about the treasure trove that they have on the edge. They have depth there now. The secondary looks like it has players, right? Like
Yeah.
Cam Sutton has done this. It isn't. Let's see. Jeff Okuda has potential. It's like no, Cam Sutton has done this. He's a professional. He's a veteran. He's been a part of some pretty good defenses in Pittsburgh. Um, if anything, it's like, hey, can Tracy Walker come back? And if Tracy Walker comes back, then
Yeah.
you have Kirby Joseph, who showed a lot of promise, right? And Somebody, again, there are just names, right? That they've at least shown you something on tape. With that 21 defense, it was like, who's really done anything except for Romeo Aquara, right?
Yeah. Yeah,
And,
it was
and
no, and I would fully agree with that. I mean, it was Romeo. It was the hope was Romeo, Jeff, and like Tracy finally taking the step, which he eventually did in that season. But like, no, you're 100% right. Everything else was, I mean, you had a rookie Aleem McNeil, Levi was someone we were hoping for, but then back injury, and then it was just like, okay,
that's a great point. The Levi thing is a great point, because imagine what I mean. He is who the Lions want, right? They want a
yeah,
guy. They want a penetrating three tech. It's just funny how that guy is Aleem, right? Who has the body of a nose tackle.
yeah,
But again, yeah, Levi was a second round pick, right? Like, I mean, there was a lot of hope and promise there. Afatu Melifanu was a third round pick, right? So
yep,
like there were investments made, but those investments haven't cashed, right? They haven't paid their dividends. And but you have Kirby, right? Like some players have Malcolm Rodriguez, right? 6th round pick.
yep,
Again, he's going to be a rotational guy this year. Everybody fell in love with the cowboy gimmick and everything. And again, he's a rotational player now. He's not your starting linebacker, which is
and
great, right? The floor. I guess my overall point, and the floor has been raised, right, in terms of the
yeah,
depth. When that happens, I think better things can happen more consistently on defense.
yeah. And I was gonna say, I think to that point, so I guess I kind of see what you're saying. It's not necessarily that there's anything more that Aaron Glenn needs to do. It's just that he finally probably has the tools and the pieces to execute everything that he wants to do perfectly, or at least near perfectly.
Yeah, right. Like, is it a question of like, is he going to do more like cover zero? Are they going to run more quarters? Like, I think they have so much versatility on defense that, again, it goes back to the home stuff where it's like you have almost kind of like positionless players, right?
Yeah,
He talked about it in the interview with Schrager. Like, we didn't draft Jack Campbell because he's an inside linebacker, and the Lions we had a need an inside linebacker. We just re-signed Alex Anzalone.
yep,
We drafted Jack Campbell because the dude can thump and he can cover. Like, we'll find a spot for him to play,
yeah.
and you have to think maybe the same conversation had with Brian Branch, right? Like, this is a
Oh,
guy we haven't even
absolutely.
mentioned yet, but like, again, another guy who we can just move him around. And oh, by the way, he's behind CJ Gardner Johnson on the depth chart. Another guy that the Lions have brought in who, again, proven he's done it. Like, I think if anything, yeah, I mean, would you agree that there are a lot of expectations now with Aaron Glenn?
Yes, that's what I think been able to say more definitively is that the number of excuses that we could probably like pull out for Aaron Glenn have kind of evaporated, because even the excuse of, well, they're weak in the middle. Well, we thought that going into the draft process, and if you didn't and you decided not to address it, well, that's a you problem. I can't
Exactly.
excuse that when you should have saw that just as clearly as we did. So no, I the expectations for this defense are much higher in my opinion, just because of simply the players. I think the only thing I would ask Aaron Glenn if I could like talk to him and be like, hey, less of this is cover zero. Like,
Yeah.
please stop doing that. Please stop putting these guys on islands.
So the question then becomes, right? Like, it's the whole like chicken and the egg thing. Like, was that a product of having less talent on defense? Like, you need to game up and you need to scheme up
Mm-hmm.
some creative blitzes, because we can't hold things down for 4 seconds in the defensive backfield, right?
Yeah, and like, all in all, I think it's a bad look when like the statistics come out and it's like, oh, you ran that coverage the most during the first half of the season, and even though you never really ran it again the second half, you still led the league. Like, hey, you did it too much.
Yeah, yeah,
that's
yeah, yeah,
that's overkill.
for sure.
Um, Real quick to the audience, appreciate you guys all checking in. Det fan man, One Funky Lions fan, Lion King. Dan, I gave you a shout out earlier. Brian, BD Buster. If you guys have questions for Ryan, so if we can get through the rest of this podcast, if you guys have questions for Ryan, please put those in the chat. I'll try to scroll back up once we get near the end of this and get a couple of those in for him. But Ryan, so enough about the defense. I do want to kind of transition a little bit to the offense. But I guess that's going to really depend on your answer to this question. So we talked about what position group you're most excited and you're most, looking forward to. Is there a rookie though that you are looking forward to and that you're expecting to shine brighter? Obviously, when OTAs and minicamp was going on, Sam Laporta was all the rage. Is that still the person for you, or is there another rookie that you're like, nah, I can't wait to see this guy now that they have pads on?
Yeah, there's always that guy, right? Like it was Sam Laporta. In years past, it was Kenny Galladay. I remember Kenny Galladay had a really big rookie mini camp. It's Jahmyr Gibbs, man. Like
Mm-hmm.
Jahmyr Gibbs by far and away. Like I'm super intrigued at what Laporta can do, and I think it's going to be really interesting to see what Ben Johnson does when it comes to the tight ends room, and that's like a whole discussion in and of itself. But
Sure.
with Jahmyr Gibbs, and not to just keep on plugging our stuff, but like Jeremy and I
No,
had
please
that.
do.
Yeah,
Absolutely do.
okay. Jeremy and I had that the series that we do every year for First Bite, where we bring on a beat writer from the local school of the Lions draft pick, and we actually talked to two different beat writers about Jahmyr Gibbs. We talked to somebody from Bama, and then our last episode was talking to somebody who's on the Georgia Tech beat, and they had been covering Georgia and Georgia Tech football since I think it was 2003.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing that stuck with me was the mention that in terms of like the two most talented football players he'd ever covered, one of them was Calvin Johnson,
Of
and
course.
the other one was Jahmyr Gibbs. In terms of just and a lot of people keep on coming back to it, and Brad Holmes has said it, and totally blanking on the awesome beat writer that we had from Georgia Tech come on and talk to us, but they kept on just saying he has it, like he has it, and I feel like the trait that they're talking about is that breakaway speed, right?
Yeah.
DeAndre Swift had breakout speed. You know, he was quick as a hiccup in terms of his ability to accelerate,
Yeah.
and he had some shiftiness to him, right? It was getting away from guys that DeAndre Swift didn't really have that extra gear.
Sure.
Jahmyr Gibbs has that, right? And
Oh
not
yeah.
only does he have that, Miko, he's a receiver. Like he's a weapon. Like, I mean, I couldn't be any more excited about a guy than a running back that gets picked 12th. Like, yeah, I'm super excited about that guy.
So because I don't want us to go back to the defensive side of the football,
Okay.
I'm going to agree with you that it is Jahmyr Gibbs, because my original player was Jack Campbell, because
Okay.
I just feel like Jack is going to come alive. And I'll keep it short and sweet on Jack. I think what Jack Campbell does best can only be shown when he has pads on. Like he can't really showcase it when he's only allowed to two-hand touch people.
Sure.
And it will not surprise me at all if like one of the reports that come out is that like Jack Campbell got into a fight with like Taylor Decker because he just went a little too aggressive on like a blitz or something like that, and Taylor just wasn't having it.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's my Jack Campbell spiel right there. But Jahmyr is the next one, because I do think we've been talking about like the speed and the elusiveness and the it factor. For me, like his it factor is actually his vision, because it's the one thing that I don't think enough people talk about, because the speed is tangible. You can see that literally as he's pulling away from guys, but it's not until like you get into like breakdown of his runs.
Mm-hmm.
And I've continued to just beat this drum to death. Alabama's line was so terrible that if it wasn't for the fact that Jahmyr Gibbs had great vision and amazing feet, he would not have got drafted as high as he did. Like he took runs that probably should have been, like to Ben Johnson's point, maybe 4 to 5 yard runs, and was like, no, I'm making these house calls.
Yeah.
Just because he can see things better and he understands angles and he doesn't have to stop his feet. He literally can just not even like stick a foot in the ground. It's like just toe tap the ground and then just teleport to another part of the field.
Yeah.
When doing like film study of him, it was like, dude, this is Christian McCaffrey level stuff. Like this is stuff that Christian McCaffrey does. It's just you put a rocket on his back and it just looks better.
Yeah, he's special, man. That was the name that that Brad Holmes name dropped in the interview with Schrager. I know we keep on going back to it, but he was talking about, when he first got to St. Louis at the time, but when he got there, Marshall Faulk was the dude, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he talked about a little bit. There have been a lot of those comps, though. Been a lot of comps to Marshall Faulk and Christian McCaffrey, and just the backs that have the natural ability of a receiver to run to run routes that wide receivers run.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what removes him from the discussion of, well, you can't take a running back in the first round because you're not going to get the value out of it. It's
Yeah.
like, people don't say that about wide receivers, right? And if you have a quote unquote running back who plays wide receiver, you have a different kind of dude, and I think he's just so special, man. I'm so excited for what he can do. But that's not even. I mean, I know we're talking rookies, but that's not even talking about David Montgomery. It's a whole different backfield.
And that's the one thing that like I've been saying whenever there's the line, or whether it's Dan Campbell or Brad Holmes or anyone's like, oh, he's a weapon, my first response is, then don't holster that weapon. Like, I don't want to see Jahmyr Gibbs on the sideline too often, right? He doesn't
Yeah,
have to be running the ball every time, but like, he needs to be on the field often, in my opinion, because that's how you utilize a weapon, and that's how you keep a weapon a threat. If you just keep it holstered and everyone just gets to stare at it on the sideline, then like, no one's going to care about it. Obviously, yes, until it burns you, but like, make the league fear Jahmyr Gibbs early and often is has been my outlook about him.
yeah, and don't you feel like that's going to happen when you're missing Jameson Williams for 6 games too? Like, you're gonna want your playmakers on the field as much as possible. And to your point, I think the thing that Jahmyr Gibbs, to your point, he opens up stuff just by being on the field in terms of,
Mm-hmm.
hey, he's in the backfield, pre-snap stuff. Goff sends him out into the slot. It's telling you what the defense is in, right? Like, I mean, there's so many little things that just moving Jahmyr Gibbs as a chess piece around that offense. And if I can trust anybody on the Lions to do their job, I'm trusting Ben Johnson.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and just and speaking of which, I mean, again, let's hope that we finally get that two back in, like, both backs in the backfield, or one
yeah,
in the slot and then motioning in the backfield, because like you said, David Montgomery is another guy where it's not like you're not tipping your hand when he's back there. Like, you literally have to be ready for anything. And if you put Jahmyr back there, or if you flex Jahmyr out from there, defenses are going to have to like stop and think for a second. You're going to get a lot of linebackers just toe tapping because they're not going to be sure what to do once that ball is hiked up.
yeah, absolutely.
But you kind of like teed this up a little bit earlier with the idea, or with the fact that like Jameson's going to be suspended, the first 6 games of the season. It's been a big talking point, throughout the offseason. Some of it's been, well, a lot of it's been nonsense in my opinion. But again, training camp is here, and this is one of the few times that he's going to be able to be with the team, and when he's going to be able to get the most work. One thing that I did start to wonder, though, is when you're looking at a guy that's not going to be available for the first 6 weeks, how do you dictate where he lines up and like how many snaps he gets in training camp? So, in your opinion, should JMO actually be taking first team reps throughout training camp, even though he won't be there those first few weeks of the season?
It's a good question. I think he should. Um, I think that he absolutely should be out there, A, as much as possible, and B,
Mm-hmm.
in the position that he's going to be expected to play, come, week 7, week 8, right? Like, I want him getting as many reps as possible in the formations and with the players that he's going to be playing with as possible. And I know there are tons of opportunities, right? I think, we talked a lot about the defense, right? But the wide receiver position is a really intriguing one to me, just because there is some significant turnover, right? Like, yeah, DJ Shark is gone, but when DJ Shark was here and when he was healthy and when he was
Yeah.
playing, I like DJ Shark when he's a healthy football player. It's not here anymore though. It's Marvin Jones. It's the Lions getting the band back together, so to speak. Uh, but Jameson, in my opinion, he just needs all the reps that he can get in the comfortable situations that he's going to be finding himself in when he gets on the field, come Sundays in the season.
And that's been my overall opinion as well, is that like I get that he won't be there, but you need to treat him like he's a starter. You need to treat him like the 12th overall pick, and
Mm-hmm.
like someone that you expect to be a key cog in your offense. So last year he couldn't do these things because he was injured. So that's why he
Mm-hmm.
couldn't do these things in training camp. He's healthy now. Don't allow the fact that he's not going to be available to take away from his development, because this is still key development time for him. We heard about some of the chemistry issues that him and Goff were having. This is the time to work all of that stuff out. And yes, that may actually, I think you can kind of get away with that too, because the person or the players that are probably going to be like replacing him, like Khalif has that relationship with Goff. So it's like he doesn't need first team reps because he's worked with Goff the last 2 years. I would run JMO until he can't anymore. And based on the interview that you guys did with his with his trainer that he's worked with,
oh yeah,
he would be all for that. Like, yo, let me get all the reps. Because it's only going to make him better, and it's only going to keep him, I think he also just mentally locked in and mentally connected to the team once he goes through that suspension.
Yeah, tell me if you agree or disagree with this, but like I think that if Jameson Williams comes back and he's a 17 yards per catch kind of guy, that's what's going to take the Lions from being a 9-10 win team to like 11-12 win team. Like if he shows up and he's a dude, Miko, like I mean, it's off to the races, right?
Listen, I've already had some people tell me in a previous video that I was a little crazy for putting JMO in my, like, he could be one of the Lions that make his first Pro Bowl, just because, like, I get it. He didn't have a lot of opportunities, and he only technically had 1 touchdown. Obviously, he would have had 2, but the other one got called back. But it's real. Like, that wasn't hype that what we saw when he was on the field. Like, that same thing that we're talking about with Jahmyr Gibbs, that it is there with JMO. And it's like, so the same way you don't holster Jahmyr, you better not holster JMO when he comes back, right? Don't. And that's the other thing too. I don't think people like really recognize is that, like, he already feels bad enough. He's already getting it from all sides on the decision that he made. Don't isolate him anymore and make him feel any worse about his decision by not keeping him a big part of this offense. I've been saying this, the minute he gets back, I want 10 targets. Like, just feed him. I don't care how it is. Drag routes, end arounds, deep post. I don't care what it is. It needs to be a JMO day.
Oh yeah. I'm all about feeding the guy who might be the most athletic player, and that's saying something now that they have Jahmyr Gibbs. He might be the most athletically gifted player on the Detroit Lions.
Listen, it would make me so happy. I know you're also a Michigan State fan. This would make me nothing but happy if I could get a Jahmyr JMO like running down the field, high-fiving on their way to the end zone. The same way we got like Kenneth Walker and Speedy Naylor like high-fiving on just give me that moment, and I'll be happy as a Lions fan.
I think that's really important though, and to underscore the point you made, like, it wasn't fugazi, right? Like, I mean, the 1 touchdown, it got taken back and it was a flea flicker, whatever, all that jazz. But like the end around against the Bears, right? Where, I mean, it's just speed, right? And he's moving. And, I was at the game. I was in standing room for the Vikings game where he scored the touchdown. And it was like, as soon as you see him get off the line, and it's like, oh man, like, he's unaccounted for. And even if he's being accounted for, like, his speed is something else, man. And he truly, in my opinion, he's the guy who he'll be the key. He'll be the key to from this offense being good to being like great.
Yeah, to being explosive. I mean, again, like you look, I mean, again, they're different caliber of quarterbacks in my opinion, but you look at what Patrick Mahomes had when he had Tyreek Hill, like that offense was still good last year. Clearly, they won a Super Bowl. Like they were still good.
Yeah.
But it was a nightmare. Like, teams sweated when you had to deal with Tyreek Hill, Patrick Mahomes, and Travis Kelce. Like, this is going, like, you knew you were in for a long day. If the Lions can capture that magic where you have teams just like, dude, we got to go against, there's Goff back there, there's St. Brown in the middle, they have Gibbs and Laporta, and I got to worry about JMO beating me deep. Like, and I got to deal with David Montgomery just literally like hammering the football every time he touches it. Like, you're gonna have teams just mentally exhausted before they even get to the field.
Right. Yeah. I mean, hey, keep an eye out. What if Penei Sewell reports as eligible? We're in trouble, man. We're in trouble.
If they start running him in Wildcat.
Hey, Jeremy's been real big on let's get Aleem McNeil in the backfield. Like, he was a running back in high school. Like, can we see some of that stuff in the NFL?
I would love nothing more for it to be like a week 18 or just a serious beatdown of some team, and they just be like, "Hey, we're gonna run, we're gonna run Sewell and McNeil at running back and fullback, get in the
Very,
end
very
zone."
disrespectful stuff.
Oh yeah, something that's gonna cause a fight at the end of the game, but it's just gonna like the fans would eat it up. Um, you kind of hinted at this a little bit earlier, and I want to get your take on it really quick. We've been awfully positive. Some people are going to watch this stream back and be like, "Dude, the Kool-Aid was flowing," and maybe I've partaken a little more than I normally do.
Yeah.
But coming back down to earth a little bit, when looking at that specifically the wide receiver group, do you see any concerns? Because, like we said, JMO is going to be suffering a suspension for those first 6 games, and I've kind of, again, when taking a look back at it, like, you know what, this group is somewhat top heavy. There's not a lot of proven depth beyond, those first 2 to 3 guys, really. I mean, obviously you have Marvin Jones, who's a veteran, but is definitely on the other side of his career as well. Do you have any concerns about the depth at the wide receiver position?
I feel like I have so little concern with the offense from its stylistic capacity when it comes to Ben Johnson. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Like if the Lions had the same group of wide receivers, but if Ben Johnson was the head coach of the Carolina Panthers right now,
Yeah.
I would just be overall concerned about the Lions offense. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
there was that athletic piece that did a really great job of showing the relationship between Goff and Ben Johnson and what they've kind of built together. I think when it comes to the wide receiver depth, I look at, and I know they're different positions, but I mean, what did the Lions do after they got rid of TJ Hawkinson? And this isn't TJ Hawkinson erasure by any means,
Sure.
but Ben Johnson can do a lot with a little. And he doesn't have a little. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
Amon-Ra St. Brown is a guy who we should all be talking about how he's a top 10 wide receiver. We should be talking about how Khalif Raymond, yeah, I get it. In 2021, when he was forced to being the X receiver, when when Tyrell Williams was concussed and didn't play another game of football after the first week, and Rashad Perryman was cut, and the Lions were looking around and saying like, who's going to be the guy?
Yeah.
Well, that's not his role anymore, right? Like he's the guy who can come in and Green Bay, right? Like that's a perfect example of Khalif Raymond in doses can be lethal.
Yeah.
When Ben Johnson's drawing stuff up, right? So I think the only concern is going back to the JMO stuff, right? Like you don't have that for 6 weeks.
Mhm.
Hopefully all of that chemistry can be built throughout training camp and
Yeah.
they can hit the ground running when he comes back. I think that your question about wide receiver depth, I think it is a valid question just because you look at what some of those guys have done outside of Amon-Ra St. Brown, and it's like, yeah, Josh Reynolds is a cool security blanket for Jared Goff because of how comfortable he feels with him. Is he going to have it with Marvin Jones? I think Marvin Jones is a professional. Like I think he's a veteran. Like I think that he went over to Jacksonville, and
Yeah.
him and Trevor Lawrence, they just work because Marvin Jones works, and I know he's going to work here too, because he wants to be here, right? Like I don't think that there's any greater telltale sign that this organization has moved past where they were.
Mhm.
Graham Glasgow, right? Like
Yeah.
he signs back after being literally part of the guard rotation with Matt Patricia, right? Like
Yep.
it's all forgotten, man. Like I'm coming back to Detroit because I want to play for Dan Campbell and I want to be part of this culture. And that's Marvin Jones too. And I know I'm kind of getting sidetracked, but the wide receiver stuff, where's your concern and how do you feel about like the DeAndre Hopkins stuff?
So I I've gone back and forth with this where I feel like there is a level of like I get when people say like how you're saying like, hey, you have Ben Johnson and Ben Johnson's going to figure it out. And I think that's all well and good until one guy gets hurt. And that's kind of how I feel. Like if another guy goes down while JMO is out, things start to look a little bit dicier because that's kind of how things looked last year too. Like I think we kind of forget that when Chark went down, it was like, oh, okay, well, we still have Amon-Ra and we still have Reynolds, we'll be fine. And then Reynolds got a little banged up, and we're like, we still got Amon-Ra and we'll be fine. And then Amon-Ra got banged up, and it's just like, okay, wait, now there's a slight problem
Yeah.
in this
Oh yeah.
algorithm.
Yeah.
And
You remember the Patriots game then, right?
yeah. And
You
so
remember
like
the Dallas game when Amon-Ra got concussed, or well, he went out for concussion. He wasn't actually concussed, but yeah, that's your point, right? Like those are valid feelings of being anxious of when things go sideways. It's real.
it's yeah, like it, and I think it comes up quicker than I think some fans realize, is that like if something happens within those first 6 weeks to any of your top three options, things are going to look very dicey, because now we're going to be talking about, and the thing that most people don't want to talk about when it comes to their football team is, well, now you're really going to have to lean on your rookies. Now we're going to be talking about, no, Sam Laporta needs 10 receptions a game. Now Jahmyr Gibbs needs to be playing like, 75, 80% of the snaps, because we need him, because this person got hurt and there's just not enough weapons on the outside. I don't think they necessarily need to go out and spend big on a veteran receiver like the DeAndre Hopkins. I don't think they're that close. But if they did go out and do it, like, I would also understand why, because again, that depth is a little shaky after you get past, Reynolds, St. Brown, and Khalif. And like I said, I think Marvin's going to be not exactly what DJ Chark was, but he's going to basically be that reliable receiver that Goff is probably going to be able to count on those tough third downs or those tough fourth downs where it's like, hey, I just need somebody that's going to make a tough catch. And this ball's probably not going to look pretty, but like just catch it and get the yardage.
Oh yeah, Marvin Jones can run a comeback route for
Yeah.
sure. I saw him do it plenty of times, right? When he was here in his first stint. So I again totally I think it's so valid to have that anxiety, right? Um, I think part of it too, and I get caught doing this too. I'm waiting for the other shoe to drop. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like I'm thinking about, man, okay, like what, like yeah, if JMO comes back after 6 weeks and it's not really working how I'm expecting it to, and well, yeah, if Amon-Ra St. Brown ever gets dinged up, well then I mean we're basically in the same position that we were in 2021, right? Like my goodness,
Yeah.
what if JMO comes back and he is the dude, right? You have JMO, you have Amon-Ra again.
Oh,
Like
dude, you won't
there's
be able to
just so
contain
much.
me.
Yeah.
Yeah, you won't be able to contain the person I become. Like, it's going to
Yeah.
be it's going to be unbearable for a lot of people. Like, I don't talk a lot of trash to other fan
Yeah.
bases or other people, but it's going to be all of that. Like, it's going to be very just disgusting in some sense.
Yeah, like there's just that bit of it's going to be a lot different to be a Detroit Lions fan this year. You know what I mean? Like it's going to be different in the sense like uncharted territory, right? Like uncharted waters. And Brian Kimmel in the chat, he brings up a good point. Like, don't sleep on Antoine Green. Like, this is a guy that Eric Schlitt's really big on, and he's really high on him too. And he's interested to see what he does in training camp. Like, Eric thinks he's a roster lock. Like, he thinks that he's for sure going to be on the team, and that's saying something for a guy who was drafted in the 7th round. So, yeah, he's another guy who, hey, maybe he surprises. Maybe he captures some chemistry with Goff, and he can be counted on in those first 6 weeks to be in the mix.
I love that. And speaking of rosters, I actually took a shot at putting, so you guys do this at Pride Detroit very well. Like every time I
Thank you.
typically
Yeah.
look at them, I'm always like, yeah, this seems about right. Like I see this happening. I've never understood I never understood how difficult it was until I tried to do it for myself. And I was like, oh, this is terrible. Like, why would anybody do this for fun? Like,
Yeah. I mean, imagine how hard it is when it's your job and your job's on the line, right?
oh yeah, like
Yeah.
even worse, right? When like you actually, like, these are the players you have to pick to roll with for the season. So I wanted to get your expert opinion, because you've done this a few times. You've put together a couple rosters. Uh, just to give a glance at what I was able to come up with, what I think heading into training camp, and you can just let me know from a glance, just like, yo, I could see this happening, or nah, you're smoking some sort of crack rock, like,
Okay.
and we can kind of go from there.
Okay. Yeah, I'm interested to see it.
All right, so this is kind of what I got together here. Uh, so hopefully this is big enough for you to
Oh yeah,
see.
I got it. Yep.
Okay, cool. So went with three quarterbacks, Jared Goff, Nate Sudfeld, and then Hendon Hooker. I just think, like, even though I think Hendon will probably find himself on IR, like they're not going to obviously risk cutting the guy that they picked in the 3rd round.
Right. Yeah. They can pup him too, and
Yeah.
right. Exactly. Yep.
So running backs, I still went with 4. They carried 4 running backs last year, but there's one name that's clearly missing from this group.
There is. Yeah. Not
I
a
don't
fan
think
of the super back, huh?
I don't think so. This was the thing, right? I really tried to find a situation of like, when are they actually really going to use Jason Kabinda? And I just couldn't come up with anything where I was like, I don't know. It came down to Jason Kabinda or another tight end. And I was like, could James Mitchell basically just do everything like that Jason Kabinda does? And that's kind of the route I took.
I think you're right. Like, and especially, I think that guy's Brock Wright too. Like,
Right.
he's a guy who at Notre Dame, um, I did the roster preview for him, like last week, and the one thing I noticed about his snap distribution is when Kabinda was out at the beginning of last season, it was Brock Wright who was lining up as an H back and as a fullback and doing the things that they wanted Jason Kabinda to do. But TJ Hawkinson was in town, right? So
Yeah.
Brock Wright was, doing the inline, the cleanup duty stuff. So I think that I agree. I got pushback when I kind of said to Eric and Jeremy, like, I don't know, man. Like, I think Kabinda's expendable. There is a level of, oh man, they really love Kabinda as
Yeah.
like a locker room presence and as a personality and in terms of his workmanship and everything. So there's that element to it. But at the end of the day, I mean, you have to go to war with the guys who are going to be the most talented, right? So I don't have any qualms with that.
All right. Just so we can make this quick and not spend too much time on this, because I do want to like let some of the people in the audience get some questions off.
Sure.
Is there a
Yeah.
position group on this list that you're just like, I don't know, Miko, I could see this shake out differently?
I love the inclusion of Maurice Alexander. I think he is a guy that people aren't talking about either at the wide receiver position. Um, it feels weird. John Whitaker had something go up over at Pride of Detroit where he kind of looked at like who are the roster locks and who are guys that like basically aren't roster locks.
Yeah.
And he got to like the end of the exercise and he's like, I think there's like 39 roster locks. So that means that there's 13 spots open, right?
Yeah.
I don't know. I can't remember the last time, Miko, where I looked at a Lions roster and I said, yeah, I mean, like, it's pretty much done. Like, there's like a spot here. No, like, especially for the past couple years, right? In this rebuild,
Yeah.
it's been like, I don't know, man. Like, I don't know who's going to get the snaps at these spots. But I think looking at what you have here, you know, I think Covington is a guy in the middle of the defense. Like we mentioned him earlier when we were talking about defense for, 3/4 of this podcast. He's a guy who's he has a legit shot. People might look at his name and say, oh, he's a camp body. I think he's more than that. So the notable cuts though.
Yeah, the noticeable cut. So I'm gonna be very honest and transparent here. The hardest person for me to cut on this list was Julian Okwara. I tried so hard to justify keeping Julian because I think they actually do like what Julian does for them, like for their defense, the flexibility that he allows them. I just couldn't fathom the Lions keeping 6 linebackers because I think if they do keep Julian, that's where he's primarily going to play. He's primarily going to play linebacker. And I just couldn't fathom the fact of them only probably playing 2 most of the time and keeping Julian to maybe only play 5 to 6 snaps a game, maybe.
Yeah,
on defense.
Well, yeah, good point. I think it becomes a conversation of special teams, right? For a lot of these guys, like they like what Kabinda does on special teams, but looking at your roster, well, Jalen Reeves-Maybin is right there. Like you want to talk about a guy who has like a similar body comp, and Kabinda used to be a linebacker,
Right.
So like that might be an easy 1-for-1 where it's like, okay, Brock Wright can moonlight and do the things that Kabinda was doing for our offense, and Jalen Reeves-Maybin is our special teams ace. You know what I mean? So what can Julian do on special teams to keep him on the roster? Like that, I guess that would kind of be the question.
And that's where it was like, okay, would I rather have Julian or would I rather have Savion Smith? And it's like, for special teams purposes, I think I would probably have Savion Smith. Now, obviously that can completely flip if Julian goes into camp and they tell him like, hey, Julian, like you're gonna be playing special teams. And if he goes out there and he fully commits to it, I think Julian could jump a lot of guys and kick a lot of guys out just because I think they do. I think they like what he does defensively, but him being a willing participant on special teams would like just basically put him over the edge of some other guys where it's like, okay, well, yeah, we may not use these guys as frequently, or we can
Yeah.
practice squad these guys.
Mm-hmm.
That was the other reason why it was hard to cut Julian, because I'm like, you cut Julian and Julian's getting picked up like immediately. There's no like practice squad for Julian. Like you're basically saying goodbye forever.
Yeah, Miko. It's like I said, it's going to be a different time to be a Lions fan because, well, I think maybe one of Lions fans' favorite holidays was, you know, the final 53-man cut down, because it was like, okay, how can the Lions pick up some diamond in the rough that got cut from some team that didn't have room for him? Well, now the Lions are that team. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
They're the team that there are a lot of names to like. Not all those names are going to end up on the final 53.
And to appease my guy Mark LeBay for saying, and no mention of the guy who got 8 sacks in 140 reps.
Yeah.
He's the other reason why Julian wouldn't make this roster, in my opinion, because I think they would just have James Houston do everything that they would expect Julian to do, and they'd just be like, but at least we know we're going to get great sack production out of James. That's something that Julian hasn't been able to say necessarily. I think, again, there's some versatility that he could offer the defense, but if James can develop and play that outside linebacker spot consistently and play it well and develop, especially against the run, well, he's the reason why Julian will no longer have a spot on this team defensively unless he, like we were talking about, unless he commits to special teams.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. That's, again, you want to talk about interesting camp storylines. Where is James Houston lining up, and how often is he doing it, and when is he doing it, right? Because we saw that at the end of the last season, especially in the Bears game, right? There was a lot more James Houston on the field than he's just in on third down, obvious, passing situations. He's getting a lot more play in being a run defender. So, yeah, I mean, that's part of the calculus that goes into roster construction.
No, absolutely. So, okay. So I haven't completely lost my mind with this, with my roster. Like, again,
no.
I think, I think a lot of things could definitely get flipped around. I think you could probably swap out Maurice Alexander for Antoine Green. If Antoine Green has a really good training camp and has a really good preseason, I think Savion Smith, Starling Thomas, Julian Okwara, I think those guys are really going to be battling for like, hey, who can be the better special teamer? Because you may not play a lot of defense, but can you at least contribute on special teams? Those three guys I could see really battle it out. And I think if he is another one that you could probably throw in there as well, he may have to battle it out with those guys as well to get a roster spot.
Yeah, it's a big offseason for him, especially.
Yeah. And so with that said, I do want to get some of these questions from the audience.
Yeah, let's do it.
Lions 1960 saying, I'm thinking if AG has a top 10 defense, he's getting a head coaching gig. How bad would the defense have to be for MCDC to fire his buddy? 20th?
Oh, it's all contextual, right? Like, it all matter. It's funny. It's a wins and losses league at the end of the day, right? So,
yeah.
I mean, if the Lions have a 22nd ranked defense, but they win 13 games, is Aaron Glenn going to go anywhere? I don't think so. But I think there is something to, if Aaron Glenn catapults this team forward on defense to the point where they're knocking on the door of being like 13, 12, 11 in like DVOA and some other metrics. I mean, head coaching gigs are coming for some Lions assistants. And I know that's been like a point of consternation and a lot of anxiety for a lot of Lions fans as soon as Dan Campbell proved that he can put together an awesome coaching staff, right?
Yeah.
Like, but again, I have faith that Dan Campbell put things back together after they might get taken apart. So what do you think? Like, is there a whole lot of concern if Aaron Glenn brings this defense to a level of maybe more than respectability? Because I kind of want to create like a parallel where if Aaron Glenn pushes the defense forward the same way that Ben Johnson pushed the offense forward, well, we all wanted Ben Johnson to come back, and when he came back, it was a parade, right?
Yeah.
Do you think that Aaron Glenn may have that same kind of loyalty? Like, say the Lions get in the playoffs, they win a game, but they don't necessarily get to the summit. Do you think that there's something that may pull Aaron Glenn back into the fold?
Oh, I think so because I think Aaron AG's like screams job not done. I'm coming back type of energy, right?
I agree.
And
Yeah.
so to Lions 1960 to your question, like is 20th enough to get him fired? I don't think so. You're talking about a defense that was literally at the bottom. So if you take that, and obviously yes, they've upgraded talent, but still like to go from the bottom to 20th is still a huge sign of improvement. And what you would be able to hang your hat on is that like, hey, this was his first year with a lot of these guys. They're still building chemistry. And I think 20th, I think we talked about this at one point last year when they were, winning games and things like that. Like the Lions didn't need a top 10 defense to win more games. They just needed to not be last. And
Oh
so
yeah.
if you're 20th and you still get into the playoffs, you still win the division, I'm all for welcoming Aaron Glenn back, but it's just like, okay, I'm going to be very critical of the things that I think the defense needed to do. And it's going to be like, okay, were there scheme decisions? Like you're saying, there's nuances to this. Were there scheme things that you just did incorrectly? Were there injuries? Like what was it the reason that this defense wasn't top 15? Top 15 gets you locked in for sure. Top 20 or being 20th is just contextual of just a matter of like, okay, what was it that kept you from being again a top half of the NFL type of defense?
Yeah. Again, like I said, comes down to wins and losses. The Lions had a game where they scored 35 and they lost.
Mm-hmm.
Season opener against the Eagles. They had a game where they scored 45 and lost to the Seahawks. They had a game where they scored 27 in basically the first half against the Dolphins and lost that game. They nearly lost a game that they scored 31 points against the Bears. Like, that's maybe the delineation for me is like if the Lions are putting up points and it's like 25, 26, 27, 28 points and they're losing those games,
yeah,
then the seat gets hot.
Totally agree. So Ken with a question here saying, I have a question for Ryan. I believe the Lions will put Gibbs in the slot, Laporta spread out, and Mitchell/Wright on the line in tight and Monty in the backfield, 22 personnel in power. I'm guessing he's asking, could you see something like that happening?
I hope stuff like that happens. You know what I mean? I hope that Ben Johnson just is. I hope he does some real like mad scientist shit. Sorry, I didn't mean to cuss, but like,
no, you're good.
Okay. I hope he gets as creative as possible because, like you said, Miko, like we've been dying for 2 running back sets since Amir Abdullah, Theo Riddick. Like, I mean, we can go back further, but like, I don't want to date myself too much to everybody, but I think the more you look at the versatility that Lions have, and this was to the chatter's question, like you have these 2 running backs who can absolutely be on the field like almost all the time together.
Yeah,
like it really doesn't have to be what it was last year with Swift and Williams. I think they have something truly unique here with the skill set that both those guys have. Because to your point, Miko, and Holmes said this in the conversation with Schrager again, like Monty is a different back than Jamal. You know what I mean? He brings a different element in the passing game. And to your point that you made, it doesn't telegraph things when Jamal's out on the field, right? It doesn't telegraph things when Swift's on the field. And now you kind of move on from those guys. And that's been like the thing that's kind of caused me to scratch my head the most is people who say like, well, I don't know if Gibbs and Montgomery is that much of an upgrade or that different than Swift and Jamal. I think it's completely different.
Yeah, I would definitely say in the case of Jamal and Montgomery, it's worlds apart, right? It's drastically different. Swift and Gibbs is the one that I really have to see, but I think the potential of Gibbs greatly outweighs of what we were seeing in DeAndre Swift was like, hey, listen, it was always the if, right? If DeAndre is healthy, fireworks. The problem was that if never manifested itself nearly enough.
Consistency, right? Like the Eagles game last year. We're like, oh man, this is DeAndre Swift we've been waiting for.
Dude, I was in line to get into like the stadium, and like I'm like listening on my phone, and it's like first touch, 50 yards, and I'm like, DeAndre Swift's gonna have the season that I thought he was always gonna have. And
Yeah,
then finding out in the game, sprains his ankle. And it's just
yeah,
like, dude, Mr. Glass, like, please.
yeah, yeah.
Uh, okay, so from my guy Huggy Bear, one of my favorite YouTubers here.
Okay.
Do you guys believe Melifonwu makes the team? And if you don't mind, I'm gonna answer this one first, and then I'll let you
Yeah,
answer.
yeah.
He better. And this is why I've been on the train that the Lions gave Iffy a raw deal because I thought he was playing fine at corner. And then you decided to switch his position to safety. And so clearly he wasn't ready to play safety last year. He needs to make the team simply because of the simple fact that, like, I think he's going to get better. I think if he has every bit the physical tools to be a very good safety, probably a depth safety for you because you already have great safeties, but I don't know. I just feel like if he got a raw deal by making him switch positions when he was perfectly fine at corner, and I think he would have turned into a fine corner as well.
Yeah, the defensive backs, again, one of the most intriguing position groups to me, just because, I mean, who thought that Aaron Glenn and company could get that out of Will Harris? You know what
Yeah.
I mean? Like maybe the most maligned um like Lions player I can think of in recent history in terms of all the slander that he would get on game day for some of the plays that he made in the Patricia era and you know even in 2021. But I think with Iffy, it's kind of like the points that you were making about Julian when it comes to special teams. Like
Yeah.
Iffy, like there's clearly guys that are ahead of him on the safety depth chart, right? Like you think about
Mhm.
Tracy, you think about Kirby. Even though CJGJ is going to play a lot of nickel, that's another guy that you have safety depth. You have Brian Branch. Like there's a lot of talent that's clearly above him.
Mhm.
Does he prioritize special teams in a way that gets him on the roster? You know what I mean?
Right.
And from there, it you're an injury here or there away from
Yeah.
Fatu Melifonwu playing safety against the Carolina Panthers, and it's Sam Darnold running the power option, and oh my goodness, what's going on?
Right. All right, last question here, and then I have a rapid fire question section for you, and then we'll
Okay.
get you out of here so that you can enjoy your time with your family.
Oh, I
Uh
appreciate it, man. This is fun.
so from Brian saying, "Hey Ryan, what do you believe the Lions ceiling is this year regarding their record, and who do you believe their MVP on the team could be, either defense or offense?"
Oh man, I think it's tied to Jameson Williams. Like I said, I think if Jameson Williams comes back and he's an absolute dude who's a big play threat, um, I honestly think that their ceiling is. I think their ceiling's like 13 wins. Like I could definitely see them being a 13 win football team. If the Minnesota Vikings can do it, anybody can do it.
That's fair. That's fair.
Yeah. What do you think about their ceiling?
No, I was gonna say that's basically the ceiling I have for them. Like I have them around 11 wins, just again, just picking games and things like that. But
Sure.
13 is the ceiling. 13 is like everything is clicking. This offense is just electric.
Hmm.
The defense is again containing enough of these teams because again, I don't think there's that many high-powered offenses that they're going to play against. There's some that can give them trouble, but as far
Sure.
as like truly like, oh yeah, that's going to be a tough one. I don't think there's that many. And so it really just comes down to the Lions playing better defense. It comes down to you not being one of the bottom 2 or 3 defenses in the NFL. If you cannot do that, the path to 13 wins becomes way more attainable in my eyes.
Yeah, and without saying it, 13 wins might get you the number one spot in the NFC.
And listen, who wouldn't want to be able to like again 2 playoff games?
Yeah.
Because I'm just going to say that they're going to win the first one.
Yeah.
So
Okay. Yeah. Again, like that ceiling, like you said, that's everything's clicking, everything's happening. I really interesting point that you bring up though about the not facing too many high powered offenses. The
yeah,
You think about early in the season though, like Chiefs and Seahawks,
hmm
pretty early on in the season, those are going to be big tests for the defense right off the top.
and I think that's going to tell us a lot about like I'm fine with you giving up 30, 35 hell, even if it's for like it's the Chiefs, I get it. It's going to happen, and it's not just like it's Patrick Mahomes. Like it's Patrick Mahomes, Travis Kelsey, and Andy Reid. Like the holy trinity of offenses right now in the NFL.
Yeah.
Like you're going
Uh-huh.
to have your hands full. You can't let it happen though against Seattle. Like it can't. That can't. What happened last year can't replicate itself. And it's the NFL. Like, sure, somebody's going to find weaknesses in your defense, and that's fine. It's going to happen, but it just can't happen at the same clip. Like you were saying, there were a number of games where the Lions scored 35. Your defense needs to be able to hold teams to at
Yeah.
least 20 to 27. Like, bare minimum. If you
Yeah.
do that, you win more games.
Yep. As far
So,
as MVPs, that was the second part of his question,
oh
right?
yeah, yep,
Jahmyr Gibbs, offensive MVP. Like I think he's going to be the offensive rookie of the year. I really do. I know Bijan is playing behind a pretty darn good offensive line in Atlanta. And I know Arthur Smith is the architect of a lot of really, really interesting things that he did in Tennessee with the run game with Derrick Henry. But Gibbs is he's it, man. He has a specialness to him that I think that it's not even going to be a touches thing, because that might be the concern, right? Miko is like, well,
yeah.
if you have Montgomery and you got to share and all, like, I don't think there's any sharing with a guy who can play wide receiver.
No, and again, you don't get to call somebody a weapon. You don't get to tout somebody up as being positionless and just like, hey, he just as if he's this all encompassing. Like, you don't get to talk about a player like he's Excalibur. All right. Like you don't get to just basically do that and then not use him.
Yeah, and then treat him like a regular Joe. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And then just treat him like a stick. Like, no, you gotta use that and swing
I
for the
love it.
fences every
Yep.
time that Jahmyr Gibbs is on the field. So no, that's honestly that's who I would pick as well. If we're talking about an MVP, I think Jahmyr Gibbs, it's between Jahmyr Gibbs and JMO, honestly, for me, like that could really take this offense to the next level because we know what it's capable of. We saw it last year. We know what Jared Goff clicking on cylinders looks like, but it's those guys around him that can literally help propel him to the next level and propel this team to the next level, where it's not just moving down the field, but it's darting down the field into the end zones, putting up points.
Yeah, yeah. And to answer the defensive MVP real quick, I think it's kind of like how I think about on offense. Like the Lions need Amon-Ra St. Brown to be the guy that he is in order for them to be, replicate the level of production on offense that they had a year ago. Like they need him.
Yeah.
But we just said two names like JMO and Gibbs is like those guys could be the MVPs because they have something special to them, right?
Yeah.
On defense, the Lions need Aiden Hutchinson to be the rock, the foundation of I'm stopping the run. I'm cleaning up stuff because we have a better back end on defense. We saw the way that he could clean up sacks against Washington, what I mean, early on in the season. Those can stack up. I think honestly on defense, it's Cam Sutton to me. Like
See, I was gonna go same group, different player.
Okay, who are you gonna pick?
It's CJ. Like I think
okay, all right, yeah.
And maybe I'm a sucker, but like I don't think I've ever bought into a player's press conference as much as I have with CJ. Where like what he said in his press conference has matched up to this point everything that he said in that press conference and everything that he wants to be for this team.
Yeah, and he's in the right spot, right? Like Aaron Glenn is his sensei, and there's I think it's a great pick because it's so important week to week to have that guy that you can depend on because there are so many good slot receivers in the NFL, right? Like they're almost a dime a dozen. But with Cam Sutton, I think like, man, it's a heavy load to carry being the number one corner.
Sure, absolutely.
And how often do you do that in Pittsburgh? And when you're getting paid kind of like you are a CB1, I mean, but if he comes in and he does the things that people are talking about him being able to do, could be a game changer.
And the one thing I'll say about both guys that we picked, obviously they're both new, but both guys have basically like put it out there like, hey, they're looking to lead. And I think I brought this up when I talked to Jeremy when he was on here. That's something that's new and that's refreshing on this defense is that so many times we've heard so many guys be like, oh, I lead by example. You have two guys and a third in Tracy who's been like, nah, like I'm here to lead. And so those are guys that I actually believe are going to do it. And it's funny, they're all in the same position group. They're all just like, so we know where the leadership on this defense is coming from for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, Ryan. Well, again, I appreciate you coming by. I've done this with all of my guests so far when they've come through. Just a quick rapid fire, some random questions. Some of them are Lions related. A lot of them are just kind of like off the wall, goofy stuff, or just things about your personal life. So,
yes.
All right. First off, start off with an easy, slow pitch one. Your favorite Lions player of all time.
Oh man, that is such a tough question, man.
That's supposed to be like the water balloon toss one.
Yeah, I know, but it's not like it really isn't, man. I think my favorite Lions player of all time has to be Calvin Johnson. Like, okay. Yeah, let's just stick with that.
I love the fact that like I've had different answers every time. I think Jeremy gave me Barry Sanders. He gave me the easy layup. Mike gave me Stafford, and so now you've given me Calvin.
Yeah, I just have so many like part-time players. You know what I mean? Like when you said that, one of the first names that popped in my head was Louis Delmas. Like,
so I'm glad you, because that's one of my favorites.
Yeah.
Like if I couldn't pick the obvious ones, Louis Delmas made me fall in love with the Lions because I love safeties, and
yeah,
he just played safety. Obviously, he wasn't the same caliber of an Ed Reed or a Brian Dawkins, but he had that mentality as a safety, and so Delmas was somebody that I loved as a Lions fan.
Yeah.
All right. So one of the best things that I don't know if you get a lot of praise for this, but one of the best things that I love about you as far as following you on Twitter, you're not afraid to troll people. You're not afraid to clap back at people.
Yeah.
Who have you trolled on Twitter that brought you the most satisfaction where you're just like, that felt good to get out of my system?
Man, there's been some trolling that I've done. Yeah. You have nailed me there. Dan Orlovsky. I was kind of in a tough spot at that point in my life. I had like just gotten into like a really bad car accident, and I was back at home, and I was just really grumpy, and he just said some things about Verner's that like sent me through a loop. So it was one of those things where it's like, I don't know, I can't even get into it, but yeah, Dan Orlovsky was a satisfying one. Yeah. I'll tell you my favorite one. My favorite one was Dov Kleinman.
Okay.
The aggregator. I hate that guy.
Got you.
Yeah, he's awful. Look up his name with Jennifer Lawrence, and there's a ton of stuff that you can find interesting about that.
That's hilarious. My favorite for me personally was when you went at Rico. I think it was like one of the first times that you ever went at Rico, and I was like, "Thank you," because like I'm too nice of a person, and I don't know, something about like my Christian background is just like I can't do it. Like Jesus always like grabs the phone from me, like, no, you can't say that about people. So I live vicariously through other people that clap back, and it's just like, yeah.
I love that. Thank you. I'm glad you noticed that. I remember what it was too. It was him talking about Aaron Donald not being Super Bowl MVP.
Yeah.
And I remember I asked him if Mike allowed him to say that.
Yep.
Yeah.
That was a sweet day for me.
Thank you.
This one though is going to be a little bit of me trolling you.
Yeah.
Your reaction if the Lions bring back the black jerseys?
Not happy. Not happy. That'll be my reaction, Miko. I won't be happy.
What if it's not like black and blue? Like I've heard somebody else say this, and I'm actually like jumping on the bandwagon of this one. If they were like a cool like blackout jersey, so it's literally like there's no blue, it's literally just like something that's just very unique in the NFL, where it's like a straight up blackout jersey.
Yeah, that might be cool, but it won't happen.
That's fair.
Yeah,
that's fair.
I think again, I think a lot of people get stuck on me saying like, why would you want to be reminded of the Millen era? Because it's like, well, it's kind of like empowering to like embrace it, but like we're better than that, and we're moving on from it. And it's like it's just not that. Like again, like you said, if it's something original, that would be cool. But just everybody and their grandmother has a black alternate uniform. It's like not trendy and cool anymore.
It's still trendy and cool for me because like, so full transparency. So like the first team
Yeah.
that I ever loved in the NFL was the Baltimore Ravens.
Oh yeah,
And when the
absolutely.
Ravens
That
came
black
out
and
with their,
purple.
oh my God, it was just perfect. And then the Eagles did theirs. And something about Brian Dawkins in a black and green jersey, I was just like, that's
Weapon X,
menacing.
man.
That's
Yeah.
intimidating. And so I just want that for the Lions. I just want them to have that type of fear factor, but I also need them to change some other things too. Like it's not just the black jersey. You're gonna have to do away with the Lions logo. Give me something that's more menacing, that's more intimidating,
Mm.
that screams, "I'm gonna bite your kneecaps off."
Fair enough. Yeah.
Next question. Favorite Halo game of all time.
Oh, favorite Halo game. Definitely Halo 2. It was the first game that ever rattled me as a student academically. I got my first B because of Halo 2 in math class. Mr. Ott's 7th grade math class. Yeah, a lot of Halo 2.
So I've only played like a little bit of Halo, and like, cause
Okay.
I had an Xbox for like a hot second, and I was like, don't get the appeal. But
Okay.
I'm gonna have to. I'll have to make my way back around because I mean, again, when a franchise stays around for that long, it's not because it's not good. So,
Oh yeah, for sure.
um, so kind of like something I mentioned at the beginning of the show. You are a teacher.
Hmm.
So, what is the best part about being a teacher for you personally?
It's the relationships you make, man. Like, you know, just in a really unique position. I don't think it's supposed to be rapid fire, and you had the wrong person on
Oh
to,
no, no,
to do rapid
it's
fire.
rapid fire for me. So like I don't
Okay.
have to be long winded with them.
Yeah. I think the thing that was most difficult over the past couple of years was, just the way that COVID impacted that ability to foster relationships with students. Um, because so much happens like in the classroom, just beyond, um, you know, getting content and delivering content and having students learn arithmetic and reading and things like that. It's getting the buy-in. So it's so hard to get buy-in
Mhm.
when we're through a screen to one another, and that was just so challenging. And I know, like, when my first teaching gig was in 2016. I was a student teacher, and like that was the thing that kept me there
Yeah.
was the relationships that you would develop with students, and just learning about them, learning about their home lives, and learning about the things that make them tick and the things that interest them, and sharing things where it's like, man, like I think like at the time it was like it was probably like Marvel movies or something, but it's like, man, if you get like an entry point into sharing interests about something, then all of a sudden like school becomes easy. You know what I mean? So um, that that entry point in having shared interests, and just being able to shoot the shit with students, and
Yeah.
and getting an idea of who they are and how they tick, like it makes school easy, and I think that's kind of like football, Dan Campbell, right? Like, you get that culture in place and you get buy-in and things like that, the football becomes easy.
It's I'm really happy to hear you say that part. So like I've never been a teacher. I aspired to be a teacher at one point in time for that very reason.
Yeah.
Uh I've worked at my church for like the last 8 years with students, specifically like high school students, and
Sure.
that's the best part, right? Is the relationships. It's that part of it that's kept me doing it as long as I've been doing it. So
You
that's
get it.
really encouraging.
Yeah.
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 Um Outside of the Lions, which franchise do you want to see win a championship in Detroit the most?
Man, this isn't breaking news, but like, to be honest, I started working at Pride of Detroit, and the Lions were like, of the four, you know what I mean? The Lions were like
Mhm.
third in terms of like my hierarchy or my power rankings for Detroit sports.
Okay.
I've always been a Red Wings fan. That was like my entry into understanding what being a fan was. Like, being a fan is a fanatic.
Okay.
And I mean, there was no better time than than me to learn through sports, or learn sports fandom through the Red Wings in 97, 98,
Yeah.
early 2000s. Like, I was a kid, feeling my way through what it meant to be a fan, and absolutely spoiled with Detroit Red Wings success back then. But like, obviously, seeing the Lions win a Super Bowl, far and away the one thing I want to see before
Mhm.
I close this chapter of my life. But Red Wings success, I think, is really, I think it can really bring Detroit sports fans together. A lot.
Yeah.
I mean, all these sports can, right? Like, I mean, what's your kind of like hierarchy for Detroit sports, 1 through 4?
I'm gonna be completely transparent. Mine's is seated in bitterness and hatred at this point.
I
so
love that. I love being petty and stuff. So
so number one is the Lions. It's
okay,
by far the Lions. Number two would actually be the Wings. I'm not a huge hockey fan, but like starting to do this and my good friend Scotty, like being a hockey fan himself, actually made me like really appreciate hockey itself, but also the history of the Wings and what they've done, like you're saying, for the city. And just like
mm-hmm.
it's it's literally like Lions and Red Wings are two things that you rarely hear people like debate when it comes down to like what their favorite Detroit sports team is. Like they don't really, not many people here have another hockey team that they're a fan of, or not many people here have another football team that they're really a fan of.
Yeah,
Um,
agreed. That's a good way to put it. Yeah.
so Lions, Wings, Tigers, and the Pistons will forever be in the gutter until they start winning something and give me reason to believe that they're a quality run franchise.
Yeah. Okay. So that's how I feel about the Tigers. Like I am a fair weather fan when it comes to the Detroit Tigers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I can't do it. The Pistons crushed my heart. They stepped on it when they let Ben Wallace walk away.
Hmm.
They completely shredded it when they traded Chauncey for an old Allen Iverson. And I've just never recovered. I've never recovered.
It's tough, man. I remember where I was in my bedroom playing NBA 2K when I found out about Chauncey Billups getting traded. It yeah, man, that was tough. That
I
was
was
tough.
in the Palace. I was working at the Palace at the time.
Were you? Okay.
I told the story to Mike when he was here. And they had just like decorated the concourse that year with like all the history of things that had happened at the Palace. And
Oh
Chauncey like had
no.
like a big like
Oh
main feature. And I
no.
was like, the hell are you guys gonna do with this now?
You're just gonna hang up a curtain in front of it, like.
Dude, I think they put Rip over it, I think.
Hmm.
Not too long. It was just like, but yeah,
Oof.
I never forgave them for that one.
Yeah. All right. I get it now, Miko.
um from my understanding, you are a big like hip hop head, right? Love
Yeah,
hip hop
I
music.
love hip hop. Yeah.
So give me your Mount Rushmore of hip hop artists.
Oh man. Okay. For sure Nas is on there. Like
Okay.
that was kind of like my entry point, which kind of feels unfair, you know what I mean? Like
Mm-hmm.
the first album that I listened to, like I feel like I was a freshman in high school, right? But like
Yeah.
that step you take where like you start like really listening to music, like music just isn't on, like you start listening to stuff.
It's not just sounds, it's
Right. Yeah,
actual,
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Like, I mean, don't get me wrong. Like, I love the Baja Men, right? Like, 7-year-old me couldn't get enough of letting the dogs out. But like, uh, listening to Illmatic when I was a freshman,
Mm-hmm.
as cliche as it could sound, it was just like, well, this is incredible. Like, where do I go from here? And that, honestly, one of my favorite like personal journeys in terms of like, oh man, like just navigating like all of the sound of like East Coast boom bap stuff from like, you know 93 to, going into like the mainstream kind of jiggy era with
Nice.
like with like Jay-Z. Jay-Z has to be on there too.
Mm-hmm.
Like I do think like in terms of longevity and success and
Absolutely.
um I mean, how could he not be on there? And obviously those two have to be right next to one another. I think that you can't tell the story of hip hop without telling those two guys. And I know like maybe a lot of people would be like, oh man, like how can you say that and not say, Tupac and Biggie? Um uh I there's something about that rivalry specifically with me that
Yeah.
like spoke to me in terms of like it wasn't so tragic, the way that things quote
Yeah.
unquote. I mean, like Jay-Z and Nas, for all intents and purposes, they made up. You know what I mean? And they
Sure.
came together. And I think that I wish that could have happened for Tupac and Biggie. But yeah, Jay-Z, Nas, man, I'll throw a curveball. I'll say Raekwon. Like Raekwon,
Okay.
he has my favorite solo Woo album, and I love everything about him in terms of his demeanor and the way he carries himself on the mic and stuff. So it's really East Coast heavy right now. I don't. It's so complicated. My
It's a good list.
relationship.
Like, you got a good list going though so far. So like,
Thank
it's a
you.
respectable list.
Thank you. It's so hard. Like 10 years ago, the first name I would have said would have been Kanye.
And now it just feels like it's not appropriate.
Now
You're
it feels
you're
much
allowed
more
to
complicated.
you're allowed to say Kanye post, the nonsense, like, or pre the nonsense.
Pre the nonsense, yeah. Man, yeah. But I don't know how I can like I don't know how I can like herald and champion Jay-Z's longevity and success and things like that, and be like, well, I just want like a little part of Kanye, or I mean, a lot of part of Kanye West, but I'll put him on there. I mean, it sucks that he like was a Nazi and supported Donald Trump, but
And gave a scoopity poop, like, yeah, like.
yeah. Yeah, like they said, I mean, Kim got the drums in the divorce, and that was sad.
Yeah. All right, last 2 questions, and I'll let you get out of here. Favorite moment while being part of Pride of Detroit?
Oh man, favorite moment for Pride. There's a lot. God, man, it's hard to think, but like this is year number 8 for me that I've been doing this, and there's a lot. There's stuff. We've mentioned this on the podcast before, but one of my favorite moments was off air.
Yeah.
It was way back in the day. It was the Big Ten championship game, Michigan State playing. Why am I blanking? Was it Iowa? I think it was Iowa. Yeah. Myself and Jeremy and Chris and Alex Reno were all on a oh man, not Zoom. It was a Skype call. We were on a Skype call, and we're watching the game, and we're just kind of hanging out, whatever. And Michigan State, they score that touchdown, the reaching over into the end zone, and that's going to win. Yep, LJ Scott's going to win the Big Ten championship for him. And Alex Reno had a 6-pack of Founders beer, and just immediately like lost his mind, and then ended up like getting sick and everything. And it was one of the funniest like Irish exits I've ever been a part of online, because it was like pure elation and celebration, and then it was just immediately shutting off his, and me the next morning being like, Alex, what happened? He's like, dude, I slept in the bathtub. Like, it was not good. But man, so many great memories. So like we've done draft stuff. Like we all traveled. There were a bunch of us that traveled out to Philly for the 2017 draft, where Tease Tabor and Jared Davis and that awesome draft class.
All right, so maybe that trip wasn't so great in hindsight.
yeah, maybe not the best, but like I honestly think maybe all of these great memories could be replaced with how awesome it is going to be for the draft to be in Detroit this coming up year.
No, absolutely. And last question, I'll let you get out of here.
Okay.
Ask this to everybody. The 2023 Detroit Lions will.
I need the Dan Campbell dramatic pause. Because they can.
I need to have it queued up. Like, I need to have the clip queued up for this moment, so that when people get to it and they pause, I could just play the video until they're ready to answer.
Yeah, exactly. One of my favorite memes from the Dan Campbell era has been that question overlaid with the Vietnam footage, and then playing Fortunate Son in the background. Yeah. One of my favorites. So, but man, this has been fantastic, Miko. Thank you so much for having me on, man.
No, man, I appreciate you coming by. Like, this has been equally as fun for me.
Yeah, I'm sorry I'm so long-winded. It's like an hour and 43 minutes. You're like, yeah,
I was gonna say, this isn't
takes about an hour 15.
It's not just you. This is also me. This is why I said in the DM, like, yo, if I start rambling, just tell me to shut up. But yo, to the audience, I appreciate you guys so much for coming through, for making Ryan feel welcome, for hanging on as long as you guys have. We still have like 26 people watching, so if you guys haven't hit the like button, please do that. It really helps out the channel a lot. Subscribe if you haven't. If you have subscribed, share it with somebody else that you think would equally like this channel. And again, I always appreciate you guys coming by. There'll be no Friday stream this week. I'll be back on Monday. We'll talk a little more of training camp, and we'll see what else we'll have in store for you guys come Monday. But appreciate you guys. Enjoy your weekend, and I'll see you guys next week.